Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today I'm going to be talking about Action Comics issue 1093, written by Mark Waid, with art by Skylar Patridge, colours by Ivan Placencia, and letters by Steve Wands. Superboy battles a threat he cannot see as the Kents soon succumb to the same problems the Jacksons and the Hubbards did, as Jonathan opens a letter from the bank that tells the Kents that their farm is being foreclosed on. Again, Waid is just adding all these little bits that somebody only deep in the Superman source, in the Superman lore, would understand and get, as Jonathan also mentions a character named Dr. Fry, who was the Kent's doctor in both the Superman movie as well as Superman and Lois. There's a deep cut, and it's something only Waid would want to put in a book. No one else would be interested in that, but Waid is. He's writing it really for himself and for people like me who love that sort of stuff and love that sort of consistency within how the world of Smallville is being presented. As Parr deals with the financial problems, Clark and Pete hang out with Lana, who's keeping a close eye on the skies, hoping to see Superboy again. Something Clark finds very odd since he's jealous of himself, but he can't tell anyone he is Superboy, so it's frustrating him greatly. Clark notices his father's truck in the town by the bank, and Martha, who is working at the local antique store, pops out to ask Clark to go and see why Jonathan is at the bank, since he hung up the phone on her. Clark and Pete enter the bank and find lots of people complaining about the farms and how their houses are being repossessed. Jonathan finds Clark and Pete and explains that Morgan Stone, the bank's old manager, has retired and a young new manager named Will Parmenter has taken his place, scheduling lots of places for foreclosure so the bank can finally begin to make some money, which makes no sense because half the town folk there are punctual with their payments. So I don't know what it is with bald-headed people trying to start shit with the super people, but this new villain, Will, is great. He's just smug. He thinks he's better than all of these small town farmers. This job is beneath him, but he's doing it out of, pure glee and probably some money kickbacks. But the little introduction here is great since it really sells that he's just an absolute douche who Superboy has to deal with in a really interesting way, because this isn't someone he can just grab and throw in jail or, threaten, with his powers or something. This is be an interesting threat for Superboy. Parmenter says that unlike Stone, he will not be as lenient with mortgage payments as Stone was, but he will get to the bottom. Something that Clark would learn a lot later was a flat-out lie. One of Smallville's farmers doesn't take kindly to Will's new management style and enters the bank with a ski mask and shotgun. Angered, the bank is taking his home and livelihood. Clark is put in a difficult situation. Either Superboy intervenes and he exposes his identity, or he lets the gun-wielding farmer hurt someone, even if that someone is a crooked banker. Luckily, Pete steps in and attempts to de-escalate the situation as he recognizes the masked man as the school's football coach, Jerry Dale, asking him to put the gun down. Clark tries to calm Pete down, but Jonathan steps in and helps Pete, telling Jerry not to throw his life away. Pete's actions help Jerry stand down, and the next day he earns a spot on the front page of the Smallville Gazette, branding Pete as the town's hero. Clark being put in a position where he can't do anything to help and thus has to rely on others who have been inspired by his actions as Superboy, mind you, is really quite cool. And I really like that Clark can't really see that now because he's, just a teenager. He feels he let everyone down because he couldn't become Superboy in that moment. As the Kents worry about what to do about the bank, Clark smashes deep into the ground and returns to the farm with giant chunks of gold, telling his parents he will remember that old abandoned gold mine they saw on vacation one year, and he dug deep enough through their shafts and found that there was still some gold, wanting his parents to use it for the payments to the bank. Parkin immediately and rightly says no, since while things appear dark, there is no excuse to use powers for personal gain. Clark tries to explain that it's just a gift from him to them, but Jonathan knows that he benefits from that gift as well. Martha considers taking it, but also backs up Parr, knowing Clark means well, but they can't take the gold. This is the next important lesson Clark has to learn, not using his powers for personal gain, and I like how Waid is presenting it, where Clark means well, he just wants to help, but it's in the wrong way, and he's going the wrong way about it. Clark becomes angry since it's practically the same as finding $1 on the sidewalk, but Ma knows it's really not, and he can't take the easy way out. Jonathan tells Clark that he has to have principles and they are more important than any farm, and it's his and Martha's job To ensure Clark knows this and knows that there is no shortcuts, since they don't know where his powers come from and they could go away one day after Clark has spent a lifetime of doing things the easy way with them, and then he will be stuck. Clark is upset knowing that having extra abilities means extra rules, which his mind told him was silly since he thinks he should make things easier with these powers. Superboy does know that the law is on the bank's side though, and helps some of the people affected by the foreclosures by moving out of their homes. This is such an interesting threat for Superboy to face, as I said before, because it's not something he can just, use his abilities on, or, just being there doesn't stop, the criminal from acting or anything like that. That has happened in the past, so he has to actually think about dealing with this problem, and he's got to try to apply some of the rules he's learned already to it, but it's a different animal of a problem and he can't throw a punch, talk it down, anything like that. Superboy soon finds some farmers that won't go quietly, and old Frank brandishes his gun at the cops who have come to kick him and his wife out of their home. The cops try and talk him down, but the man says that his family have been there for 6 generations and the bank just turfing them out isn't right. Superboy appears suddenly and his sudden arrival makes Frank's gun go off, but luckily Superboy catches the buckshot, showing that he's actually learned not to stand there and pose to deflect bullets. He calms the cops, revealing that his arrival startled Frank is all, as Frank's wife wants Superboy to run the cops off, putting Clark again in a sticky situation since he came there just to de-escalate. Frank is upset since he thought Superboy stood with them, escorted away before Clark can say anything to the man. This is the moment Clark realizes the threat he is dealing with isn't something he can just use his powers on, but instead of pouting or getting more lost in himself, he does some investigating, talking with Parmenter's boss in Metropolis, but she is also spewing the same false sympathies since she couldn't do anything and left it in Parmenter's hands to deal with. Clark tried to talk even with Mr. Parmenter himself, going by the bank and wanting to wait in his office, something he finds stupid since people don't have to lose their homes over computer errors or legal loopholes. While waiting for Parmenter in his office, Clark goes through his Par's lectures on privacy and uses his X-ray vision to spy on Parmenter's files in the filing cabinet, finding some rather incriminating evidence. Clark, going against his parents' teachings and again kind of cheating with his powers, has got to come back to bite him in the ass really soon, and he's going to learn from it, that's not the right way of dealing things, that's the cheating way. He's got to find these things naturally, and people have got to tell him things. And again, this also goes into his role as a reporter later on in life. He's learning things he'll be able to put to use as a reporter. Clark's snooping garners the attention of the bank clerk, who tells him to leave, but Clark realizes that doing so endangered the evidence that would prove any accusation against Parmenter, since the clerk would no doubt hide the papers, if not destroy them. He thinks about stealing the papers or threatening the clerk, but Ma and Pa told him that there was never an excuse for theft or bullying, especially for Superboy. Left with a huge choice to make, Clark knew it all came down to timing, as when Parmenter arrives at the bank, Superboy announces to the entire town about the files he found and how they show that Parmenter sold off all of the farmland to Stag Industries for development. However, he signed the contracts 5 months ago, before he legally owned any of the properties, and on top of that, he received a personal commission on every sale. Will panics and runs to try and find the files, putting them all in his briefcase so he can escape, but he finds his boss, the same woman Clark talked to earlier, waiting for him, wanting to know what Will is doing. Later back at the Kent farm, Clark reveals his plan was to make Parmenter worry that he had the files on him, so the man would then go and take the files from his office and reveal their existence to all by himself and right in front of his boss of all people, who Superboy convinced to come to Smallville and see for herself. This is a fantastic outcome to the story, Clark using some tricks to make the villain expose their own wrongdoings. He used talking as a way to get in and, used subterfuge. It was kind of a lie, but also it wasn't a lie. He did see the papers and knew what was on them. He just didn't have them. It was kind of like going back to what Wade did in the last issue, where he talked about how Superman doesn't lie. He tells a variation of the truth. It's still very much the truth. It's just not exactly how it happened. As Clark raids the fridge, he explains to his parents that Parmenter's boss withdrew their foreclosures and all the errors were suspended until she herself could clear them up. Jonathan asks if Clark would have stolen those contracts if he had to, or if there was absolutely no other way. And Clark knows that he would have, but doesn't say, only knowing that his father is going to lecture him. But Jonathan doesn't, since he just wants to understand the decisions Superboy has to make, since he figures they're a lot tougher than the ones he needs to make daily. This is a neat idea that Pa is even learning from his son and learning the problems he faces, and then has to come back around to Pa trying to figure out what wisdom he can impart back to his son to help him with those problems. It's really great. It's a great visualization on that classic line from the Superman movie, the father becomes the son becomes the father. As the Kents breathe a little easier now, American soldiers in the nation of Medora don't, as they are assaulted by an unseen force, which pins them down in a building with gunfire. The lieutenant of the squad contacts General Lane, asking for reinforcements. Sam gets his message and knows that they will send some soon as he finishes up his drawings of the uniform he wants Superboy to wear when they finally deploy him into the battlefield. Action Comics issue 1093 really put everything Mark Waid has set up with Superboy, exploring his powers and how he's learning to use them and learn to use them in the right way, to the test, pitting him against a threat he can't actually just punch, while also learning important lessons such as not taking the easy way out. The military story looks to be picking up again in the next issue, which I'm really excited for. What is Superboy working for the military going to look like? I'm intrigued to see what Mark Waid has in store for us, since he hasn't disappointed me so far. I've enjoyed every one of these stories so far, and I like that they're building on each other as well. They're not just singular standalone stories. Each one is sort of building up to Superman becoming a thing, and I'm really intrigued to see how he's going to end the military story. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10.